Hello and welcome to Gateway on PTV World. Today we're discussing human resources and recruitment. For the longest time, the most traditional of majors for MBAs has been finance and marketing. It's expanded. Now HR is one of the fields that is growing. At the same time, for a lot of young people and people in the middle of their careers, one of the key aspects is finding new jobs, finding new ways to grow. And we're going to look at the field somewhat from practitioners and distinguished guests who will give us an idea about where the field is at, how can you go about improving your chances in landing the job that you're looking for, and the kind of studies that are required for you to go in the field of HR itself. So my first guest today is Yasir Qayyum. He's a senior advisor at Career Pakistan. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for hosting me.
Okay, and then we have Sadia Javed. She's doing an MBA right now. She's majoring in HR from AR University. Thank you for being on the program.
My pleasure.
And also from SNL, I have Sheraz Karim, who is the director HR, and thank you for being on the program.
Pleasure being here.
Also from SNL is Imran Dawood, who's a recruitment specialist at SNL. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you to you.
Okay, so the first question I want to ask you, Yasir, is this is before we go into something broader, is that you know, you're probably also hiring for HR departments across the country. Is having an MBA with a specialism in HR actually something the market rewards?
Thank you, Fasi. I think increasingly the trend is that HR as a field in its own right is being recognized more and more. And it's one of those areas where you face lesser competition from other strictly professional bodies. For example, if you have an MBA in finance, let's say, you're bound to get stuck and be challenged with competition from the likes of ACCAs and professional accountants and ICAP students and ACMA cost and management accountants and the likes. And so, so that sort of specializes your, the requirements of the job for people with MBA degrees in, a generalist degree of the finance major. Not so the case for HR really. HR is a bit of everything, and it's something that's got to do and deal with every other function out there. So, so really to answer your question, I think it's getting increasingly more rewarding for people, and especially so for women out there. And it's one of those fields where they can really excel and prove their mettle and really contribute to the overall strategic direction of the organization also.
Okay. And Sadia, you're a student. I mean, why did you choose this particular field? What are your anticipated rewards that you have in mind?
My reason for going for human resources was that if you go for MBA in marketing or finance, then a finance person would be related to number crunching, and a marketing people are related to selling the product to a particular person. But what we lack is that every department has humans working in them. So human resources is what caters to them and unleashes their hidden talents. So human resources I wanted to understand human behavior and how to have every person has a gifted knowledge. So how do you enhance that knowledge and bring it out to the best applied field?
Okay. Now, Sheraz, I just wanted to ask a question, like, the way Mr. Qayyum just mentioned that, there's greater rewards and all that. But one of the reward centers happens to be multinationals. But a lot of your Pakistani firms, I mean, have they really embraced HR as a function? Do they really seek to hire specialists? Or do they add it on as a last minute to somebody else's job description?
But still, I think in Pakistan, HR is not a mature profession as we would want it to be. It is primarily the multinationals or the bigger local companies which have embraced it with their heart. I mean, interestingly, when I started off, that was about 18 years ago, the company, it was still a multinational that I joined. It did not have an HR person in Pakistan, let alone having an HR department over there. And now over the years, it has grown so much that the company that I'm working with right now, they've got an HR function which has like 7 different verticals working under the HR functions. So it has grown that much over the years for Pakistan. Again, earlier, my background is finance. My education is finance, and I ventured into HR eventually. And when I told one of my cousins when I joined HR, he was working in Lahore with a company, And he said, do you know what HR stands for us? And I asked him, what is that? He said, it's Hale Rehn Do. So that's Punjabi for not now.
Yeah.
So whenever we go to an HR person, they say, nothing doing right now. But it has evolved over the years. Now it is a much more customer-centric function, customers being the employees of the organization. And far more opportunities coming through as well, which is actually very exciting. Still, as I said, it still has a long way to grow, thus a lot of opportunity for the youngsters who are taking up HR as a profession.
Okay. Now, I mean, just one additional question, like, you know, in popular culture, you might read Dilbert comics, which are about working life and whatever. And the director of HR at Dilbert's firm is a cat and exceedingly evil. So, I mean, is there this feeling that, you know, this is the place, if you're ever referred to HR, the situation's gone really bad and you're sort of seen as not the best of people within the firm?
Well, I hope not. Again, the culture is changing. So earlier, the way the HR department used to be, it was seen as a group of people which was untouchable. So they sort of sit in their offices locked away and make these policies and procedures and make sure that everyone follows them. If they don't, then they have to face the repercussions. As I said, it has outgrown that now. So where we stand at this point in time is a far more customer service oriented function. And the type of human interaction that we have now, the type of engagement that we have with the employees is far more superior compared to where we were at when, say, for example, when I started off.
Right.
So it definitely is evolving into a much more employee-friendly function rather than the evil one.
Now, Imran, I mean, you've done specialist training in HR. I mean, what was that and why do you think it's useful?
As far as the degree is concerned, I mean, it just provides you sort of a push that you are eligible for a particular position. These are just on paper requirements. But what specialized courses helps you in, like these global courses that I've done, is that it gives you a competitive edge over other, because as Yasir mentioned, as Sheraz mentioned, that we are evolving as an industry, as a recruitment industry. But the problem is that the candidates or the employees or the prospective employees that we have, they don't have that competitive edge. HR is a very small fraternity in Pakistan, and they would agree with me, I'm sure, on this. What the student is lacking, they are not, you know, being dynamic. They are not keeping up themselves updated with the current trends that are going out in that are going in the market outside. Even if I talk about, let's say, the developed countries, there are concepts that are really elite for Pakistan recruitment industry. If I may quote a couple of them, one is poaching and one is equi-hire, and employee referral is somehow introduced in Pakistan in telecom industry and in other small multinationals as well. But the problem is that, again, the use is not there. So the degrees that you talk about, that definitely gives you a competitive advantage, because on average we have like 350 plus business graduates every year in Pakistan. So everybody is an MBA HR, everybody is doing a master in HR or a bachelor's in HR. So if somebody is having a competitive edge, if somebody is branding himself the right way, then obviously it gives you an edge to, you know, promote yourself. And in modern world is all about, you know, innovation and marketing.
Okay. Now, Yasir, I just wanted to ask a question, and this is open to everyone else to contribute also. Is one of the sort of drawbacks of HR is that there's also a glass ceiling, which is that if you get to be the director HR or the vice president HR, you're never going to be CEO. Is that true?
Well, empirically speaking, I think there is some truth to it, really. But again, it depends on how you see and view leadership, really. Leadership essentially is an action and it's not a position. So it's the man behind the gun which is pulling the strings. And most often what you see is it's the HR director who's the country director's closest associate and, you know, confidant. And he's the person right up there and who has the company secrets, who has the company strategy, who knows what's in store for the future. And is the person the country director or the manager, the CEO really confides with and seeks information and advice as well. So while you have the country director or the CEO has a number of people who specialize in their own right, in their own fields, he seeks someone who can tell him about, you know, the intangibles and, you know, what holds everything together. So I think it depends on how you look at it.
Okay.
If I
Yes.
sort of add to that, as I said, the profession itself is still evolving. Earlier, what HR used to be was more on the operational side of things. So operational excellence for HR was the zenith that they could get to. Now it is changing. Now we're becoming business partners. And as Yasser very rightly mentioned, so one of my CEOs, what he said was, whenever I go in for a sales meeting, when I say it, I want my HR director to be on one side and the finance director to be on the other side. And that is how close we are to the business strategy now.
Right.
So we are getting involved. The value that we are producing as far as the talent goes is what actually sells in the market as well. If your customer has the confidence that the type of talent, the type of work ethics that you have, the type of values that a company follows, if they are business friendly and they would really fly in the industry, they're more inclined to buy from you rather than from your competitors. So it is becoming a very, very strategic part of the whole business structure. And hopefully, sooner rather than later, you'll see a lot more CEOs with
HR background.
from the HR function.
All right.
Yes, and also glass ceiling is everywhere to be found, not only in corporations. Like if you take the example of Alan G. Lafley of PG, when he was asked when he was recruited in the company, and you asked him what you want to become, he wrote, I want to be a CEO one day. And he reached the point of a CEO. So you have to have an aim, and you need to strategize around that aim to achieve a point, whatever that is.
Okay. And when you went and you did your internship, and now that you're looking, I mean, what do you see as the prospects that you're finding?
I think, as he said, you need to make yourself employable. You need to have those sort of you need to have those competencies in yourself, so that when you go somewhere for internship, they would be willing to give you tasks, and you'd be rotating around, and you'd be asking them to shift me to the front desk and other operations and know a lot of things, so that you can also find out at the point of interning, what do you want to become in the future, which organization would I want to join, what is my goal, like the the body, mind, heart, soul model. If you know what is the existence, your body would execute the same amount of energy, and you would not be experiencing any work-life balance issues and stuff. So when I was interning, I just realized that I would want to be a part of something where I'm contributing instead of just obeying the orders.
Okay.
That's what
Now, just a question again for you, Sheraz, is that when throughout your career, you're looking at hiring people, and you're looking at really entry-level positions, and it may be, say, a fresh graduate, who may have come second in class 2 in the 100-meter race, but hasn't put anything else on the CV, and it's very sparse. I mean, how do you then go about, how do you find other qualities to look for especially a fresh graduate? How do they stand out if they've sent in 100 resumes?
Well, it's interesting because at SNL, probably 80% of our hiring is fresh grads.
Okay.
So it is extremely important for us. And I was actually at one of the private universities very recently and giving a talk over there, how a person can actually stand out amongst the crowd, because that is what we're looking for. As Imran was saying, you might have 300 graduates and all of them would be applying for the same role because it does not require any experience. Their CVs really would not matter as much because they haven't really done anything as of now. But you see, the important thing is that CV of any individual does matter. Marketing yourself is everything. So when we get, say, for example, 200 applications for 10 positions that we have.
2,000, sorry.
Yeah.
2,000, so I stand corrected. I mean, the CV really speaks for the individual. It has to stand out one way or the other.
That is the initial screening process, so you cannot go through.
Absolutely, absolutely. So unless the fresh graduates really understand that and put in the time and effort to make sure that the first impression really matters, they probably will sort of get lost in the crowd and never even get that first call. So that is something that people need to take very, very seriously. And interestingly, just not looking at the fresh grads, I was recently hiring for positions tenured positions in HR. And I wasn't too happy with the CVs that came through. I actually asked a few of them to sort of sit down and redo their CVs. Because, you see, you need to understand the position that you're applying for. And then you sort of make yourself marketable for that particular role. So it's not that you need to lie on your CV, but obviously you've done so much, you've studied for 16 or 18 years or whatever, there definitely would be certain projects or certain activities that you've been involved in that would correlate with the competencies or the requirements
The
for
job
that
descriptions that are for
Absolutely.
the job, yes.
And you need to make sure that you make that connection. And if you're able to do that, I was surprised. I was hiring for a fresh position, and there was this individual with a 7-page CV. I've worked for 18 years, and my CV is like 2 pages. So you need to be precise. You need to make sure that you become visible by sort of putting in things that are sort of in your face type of things, which we can see on the first page, and that would say, okay, this is the person that we would want to talk to. And once you start talking is when your actual ability starts kicking in.
Sure.
So you need to make sure that you are visible.
Right.
That's
you interact with a lot of students in universities, and you tend to forget people. So once you meet somebody, you found him really interesting, really energetic, and there's a term used as purple squirrel in our recruitment industry where you refer to an ideal candidate. So we find actually we think that he is a purple squirrel for us, but what happens is that when we go back to office, when he sends his resume, we don't actually remember the face or the negotiation that we have or the discussion. So when we look at the resume, we found a very disoriented, sorry to use these words, lousy and unorganized person in the resume. So the problem lies within the students as well, that they are complaining and whining and crying, and you could see that on LinkedIn, which is happening. Unfortunately, the number of graduates that we have, only maybe 5 to 10% of them are using LinkedIn, but again, they are complaining against these Safarish and references and everything. Reference is a very useful tool again, but speaking of resume, so you need to spend time on your resume. As Sheraz mentioned, there are a lot of projects that you do in the universities. You need to sell yourself, so you need to place them in an order that it can be it gives you a competitive edge. It makes you stand out of the crowd, and we have seen resumes that made actually do wow, what a resume it is, and we really want to speak to that guy. So I mean, resume does make a difference, because on average we receive for an entry level role 2,000 to 3,000 resumes in like within 24 hours, I would say, once we announce the position. So the problem is that we don't have time, I'm sorry to say, because of the bandwidth issues, because of the urgency of filling the position, because we have referrals on the other hand, so we don't have time to go through the 2,000 resumes. So what we do is that we just spend maximum 6 to 10 seconds on each resume and see if we have somebody. We just do long listing, and then we go for short listing, and then we do phone screening and everything. So I mean, it is a challenge for us as well, that the resume
Yes, and instead of wasting pages and writing that I have in-depth knowledge on this subject, why don't you use those terms? Like, the person who's recruiting you knows HR, you know HR. Use such terminology which impresses the other person. And instead of writing I have good communication skills, why don't you use such words which speak for themselves? I mean, instead of wasting pages onto these unnecessary things, just make yourself sellable and speak out of others.
I would just add a bit to it. Using too much of jargons and these terminologies, they actually affect your shortlisting again as well, because you need to be yourself on the resume. You need to speak about yourself, not use those jargons and those marketing words that probably you think catch the attention of the recruiters. So you need to be yourself. You can write a simple one-liner about yourself, then spending time and doing research and making a 5 to 10 line introduction or anything like that by using jargons and marketing trends. So
just wanted to ask you a follow-up question, which is, for a lot of people, if you've seen that when you get resumes, you get there's also a very old-fashioned style, which is actually dictated by government recruiting, where you've got your NIC number, your date of birth, your father's name, everything. And visually, it's something that it's quite bad, but it does give you some basic amount of information. Now, again, like in software, like Word, you have these templates. I mean, would you recommend using a template? Because usually in HR literature, like it is estimated that everyone looks at a resume for 8 to 10 seconds in the first instance. And most people actually don't believe that at first, because your whole life's in it. You expect somebody to give it time, but they don't give it time. So, I mean, what would you suggest then is, a way or a template at least, which gets you a basic level of neatness, that at least the most salient parts of your resume can register when you look at it?
Yeah, I would prefer for fresh grad who are fresh out of the university that never go for a resume who is more than more than one page rather.
Right.
Because to add to the neatness point, what you can do is that you can simply, you don't need to add your personal information or biodata where you belong to and everything. I don't give anything like to that, any value to that, I would say. So what you're going to do is that you're going to mention your education, your projects that you have done, and it all about is the design. So once I got a resume, I would add it as an example. On one side of it, there was like achievements mentioned in a very neat and clean manner. In the middle of the page, there was like the education, the projects, and everything that he has done over his educational period. And on the right-hand side was the computer skills and everything that he has. And when I look at the resume, it was on in a landscape shape. And when I look at the resume, I was like, interesting. I mean, like it really made me wow that the guy has the sense of making a resume. So you need to mention your education. You need to mention a couple of major achievements that you have, like these Isaac events and everything that are happening around in the university, these international events, and then the skills that you have, like I know IT, let's say MS Office, communication skill maybe, or a couple of more skills that you think are mentioned in the job description. So
and is hobbies out now?
No, not at all, not at all. Because when I was hiring for our HR, what Sheraz really told me that do look for hobbies because because the competencies that we require, let's say like collaboration or teamwork. So look at them and tell me what kind of sports they are interested. If they aren't mentioned in the resume, if you find them suitable for a phone screen, just ask them. Because let's say I would give an example of cricket or maybe a football, which is really a teamwork. So if somebody is having those qualities and they are relevant to the job description, if he has spent a couple of time before applying and read the job description and he mentioned them. So you need to make changes to your resume on daily basis. When you apply to any position, you have to go through the job description in detail. You have to do a job analysis, and you have to extract those competencies that are required, those skills that are required, and you can mention them in your resume. But I mean, the fresh graduate unfortunately don't have that much time to spend on it.
The document itself needs to be easy on the eye as well. So as you're saying, 8 to 10 seconds for a resume. Unless it sort of looks good, you probably will not really spend too much time on it. So when anyone makes a resume, they need to sort of look at it objectively, whether I would really be interested in spending a bit of time on this document or not. And if you yourself are not really, because I see certain CVs which has all this text sort of there, but really not making any sense when you...
If I were to reshape the making of resumes, I would not want anybody to write their qualifications in there, because of course you've done your O-levels, A-levels, if you've reached MBA, unless you have some distinctions, just write them down. I would include one thing, that would be every incumbent would have to go through the MBTI test and write your personality type. Like if you are type J, type I, just write it down so that we know if you're suitable for that job description or not. Like for example, if you're going for a front desk job and you're an introvert, how would you do that? You would be better behind the computer.
Now, I'm just wondering, like, you've got, a student here who's sort of really into the, the theory and whatever, and now as a practitioner who's done it for a number of years, how much of that really translates?
Yeah. I mean, I hate to hit the bad news for here, but
I've already experienced that to my internships.
I mean, just to share a few pertinent points here. I have, I would safely say, more than 5,000 recruitments to my credit in the last 5 years. So that's a huge number of recruitments. If you think the 8 to 10 seconds on a resume for screening is a bad number, wait till you consider the 5,000 or 20,000 resumes which are processed in a fraction of a second by these automated bot machines that you have nowadays. There's an increasing reliance on automated sifting mechanisms and systems and computers that would really, what they do is they would go through a pile of maybe 200,000 resumes in a fraction of a second and filter down to the top 10 resumes which most accurately match the requisite job. And so that's what recruiters and big companies really like about these mechanisms, is that they make life easy for them. So I mean, so it depends really. I think it's very important for you to know, who's looking at your CV. Is it an individual, a human, or is it a machine? It's totally different ways of dealing with the two things, because they're totally different nature. The beast of a different nature when it comes to a machine. The machine looks at keywords. The machine looks at the match of what most accurately matches in your resume profile, whether or not you've done it, and what's given in the job description. Tables, I'm sorry, wouldn't help really. You know.
They don't. Even
So I think
don't,
So when it's a machine scanning your resume, it would be best to go with a normal, simple format and see what can most closely land you in the top 10, 20 CVs. When you're applying
I'm
on,
just going to take a quick break, but we're going to come back to this. We're just taking a quick break. We'll be back with more Gateway. Welcome back to Gateway. Today we're discussing recruitment and HR, and I've got a panel of very interesting guests who are quite animated in their discussion. Now, Yasser, just before the break you were discussing, there was a different way of approaching how to submit a resume for a machine and for a human being, and I'll just allow you to continue on that.
Thank you. Yeah, so if it's an individual, a human that you feel is looking at it, and there are ways to tell them apart. I mean, when you applied online, if there's an email address given in the link, it'll safely go to an email box and it'll be processed by a human who will print out the CV or maybe eyeball it on the computer screen and look at it, yeah? And if it's an individual looking at it, safe to say, you don't get two chances to make a first impression. So it has to be very, very captivating. It has to be very, very interesting. If if it's cluttered with unnecessary information, it won't help. If the HR screener has to dig out information from the resume, it will not make it. So you have to make it very simple and showcase it in a way where it's easy to find. That's for dealing with humans. The content of what goes in a resume for the human eye is a separate matter. I mean, if you put in things about what the level of commitment that you will show is all about the unseen. Really, it's difficult to make a reputation on what you're going to do. So you can talk about what you've already done, which makes sense for the and connects to the guy reading the resume. Dealing with a machine is a different matter. Normally, how do you find out if it's a machine reading your resume? When you apply online, and if you in the address bar, you get redirected to a page which says something like ch.talio.net/something long string. It's a machine that's gathering your information, and it requires you to make a profile. And even if you apply, say 2 in the morning, they'd get back to you in like 5 minutes saying, well, after detailed scrutiny of your resume, we found out that you don't closely match enough, and so you can tell that you've hit the wall, and so it's bad news from there onwards if it doesn't make it. These machines are notorious. They've been known to target and mark your resume, and so then you get once in the rut, you stay in the rut for a while till you really make some significant changes to your resume, or you apply for a different job family, or come with a different resume type, etc. So you have to get it right the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask a question. It's interesting, and there's a slight paradox, which is, if you're submitting to a machine, then you do it in plain text, one of those text files, I presume, and you also tend to write a lot of keyword search terms that you think lead, challenging, and whatever. And then at the same time, people talk about, like Imran said, like the resume needs to be a story about who you are. So is there a paradox here that the machine is forcing you to write for it, rather than the eventual processing when a human sees it?
See, there's ways around it as well. See, for example, if the job description requires you to have hands-on experience in, let's say, SQL, and so the machine would pick out the term SQL and say, well, okay, here's 1 match out of 10. And in the sentence, if you've written, I have no previous experience in SQL, would still have the term SQL in the resume, right?
Yes.
And so that's where the human eye comes in. So there's no shortcut to eventually eyeballing the resume and sifting out.
Yeah.
You will get there. You will be seen. The resume will be seen by an individual at some stage.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared for that. People talk about being lucky in the screening process, but then if you look at it, if you bisect it down, luck is really when opportunity meets preparation. So if you're lucky enough for an individual to come up and look at your resume, and you're prepared with the right job description, with the right words, with messages of what you've achieved in the past, how you've dealt with the situation, all of those things add up. And
I mean, even at my stage, even now, if I was to go out and apply for an opportunity, as Sadi was mentioning, job description would be extremely important for me.
Right.
So what I have is a dump where I've got all my achievements and all that I've done over the past 18 years there. And whenever an opportunity would come in, I would look at the requirements for that particular role and then sort of pick and choose from that dump
Right.
of information and make sure that I use the words that are actually mentioned on the advert or the job description that I have. So even now I have to be very careful how I sort of put myself across as a candidate.
Okay.
And even more so, it's important for people who are fresh out of the university.
Yes, and
they're
even the
starting.
job descriptions should be continuously updated. I mean, we also have job descriptions from, say, 20 years ago in different corporations.
Yeah.
So why don't you people who are working in HR continuously look at your pool of employees and then look for whatever skills are required and update your job descriptions?
I'll add to it, but before
The new guard is unhappy with
Yeah.
the way you do business.
Looks pretty unhappy. So
Yeah.
I'll add to the point. When I mentioned those, I didn't say keywords.
Yeah.
I said jargons like
Yeah.
strategic thinker,
Yeah.
maybe, or things like that.
Yeah.
When you go through a job description, it's on the paper. It's mentioned there. We need stakeholder management. We need excellent communication skill. We need SQL, maybe. We need .NET, if I'm being technical, and we need collaboration, maybe, or innovation. So you can mention these things. These are not jargons. These are you know, the competencies and the skills that are required for the role. So what Yasser was talking about, he was mentioning those skills and those competencies that are screened by the ATS. But I would add to that as well, if you are really disappointed that you are not getting calls. So we have that horrible thing we call LinkedIn nowadays, and Twitter and Facebook and everything. So what you're going to do is, human touch is very important, as Yasser mentioned. And if you think that, let's say we talk about these skills and everything, even if you're not mentioning them on your resume, let's say a position requires a bachelor's degree, but you don't have a bachelor's degree, as let's say I would talk about the background of Sheraz, but he has around 10 years of experience in HR. So what you're going to do is that the machine is not going to shortlist you, never. So what you're going to do is that you can, go for personal contacts, go for LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is above every contact, I would say, these days. So you can find out who's the recruiter who posted that job. Even if you do not find a recruiter, you can find a concerned person from the same company who has, advertised it on Rosy Peak or maybe LinkedIn or anything. Then you can, eventually you can, get hold of someone who actually is the point person for that particular position. What you can do is you just need to drop a simple email on LinkedIn or an email or a phone text, maybe, that look, this is my resume. I didn't have that particular qualification, but this is my experience. These are my achievements and everything. So if you give that personal touch to your application, so absolutely is going to do wonders for you in near future.
I just want to open this up to the whole panel as well, but earlier on, when I spoke to a recruiter here in Pakistan, I was actually taken aback. I didn't realize, but LinkedIn has become a really major tool here in Pakistan to actually scour and find candidates when you're doing an active search, as opposed to just waiting for applicants. So, I mean, would this be correct? Is this the way to?
I mean, social media as a whole is becoming extremely powerful tool for recruiting, not just LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional site, and recruiters would definitely be looking through that, because that is where your professional profile would be. But to be honest, if I'm to hire for any position, I would even look at their Facebook account if it is accessible, and if they're on Twitter, and I'll see what type of posts they're doing, etc., etc. It is extremely important. It is very effective when you, and even when you're going in for an interview. So CV is probably the first step, but when you go in for an interview, if I'm going in for an interview and if you are the person who's going to interview me, I'll make sure that I know as much about you as possible before I go in and sit in front of you. So it works for both sides. So yes, it is becoming very, very popular. I mean, most of the multinationals would have sort of corporate memberships with LinkedIn, and they could sort of drill into all the details that are available over there, look at it in tens of different ways for every candidate. And absolutely. So social media as a whole is becoming extremely important.
Now, Yasser, I just want to ask a question, and I'll invite a comment from Sadi as well. And Imran mentioned earlier on, and even I've seen this, is like the youth, the guys who are still doing their MBAs and are studying. is the litany of complaints. It used to be the litany of complaints were to the public sector.
Yeah.
But now it's to the private sector. There's sifarish here, we can't get in, the jobs are not advertised. And then like some of the, and in some ways even HR has institutionalized some of the things that we as a society hated, which was the referrals. And so, I mean, is there truth to that? Is there a way around that?
I think the starting point is to accept it as a reality. It's been there forever, and it's just that we've just come to recognize it as one of the effective means. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, even my great grandfather would probably have gone to his neighbor or his good friend and sought advice. Really, so what do you think about like XYZ candidate for my daughter's hand?
Yes.
And so there, that's your candidacy for. So it's always been there, really. I think instead of being intimidated by the power of referrals, it would be probably wiser to go embrace, run, and use it to your advantage. Really, most of us don't realize how many personal contacts we have, but if you just start organizing them, it's your whole telephone book, it's your list of neighbors, it's your whole family, your friends, their fathers, their uncles, whatever, brothers who are working places, your old colleagues. And so if you start organizing people on your Facebook contacts, start looking them up. And so it just depends on how serious you are about your job hunt, really. Job searches on average could take anywhere from 3 months to a year, But normally if you push the right buttons, you're likely to stand out from other people and, land yourself a chance for interviews at least every other month, And it's very useful to really capitalize and cash in on your contacts. Following up on resumes, following up in your application, even if you've not been shortlisted, always helps. People assume that, well, I've probably, failed this 8-second test and my resume is now, somewhere in a bin somewhere. But it's equally likely that, they haven't had a chance to look at it. People are busy with the other competing priorities, and oftentimes, schedules are, pretty stretched at times. So it's always useful to make a call, find a connection in the office, show up really in person if you can. Any way you can, get your foot in the door, make a personal meeting. Internships are an excellent way. It's a continuous 3-month-long interview. Yes. People are really watching you, wherever you are. And nowadays, with the advent of the technology revolution, really, your apps are watching you, your Facebook peers are watching you. Everybody's forming opinions on what you're doing. So put your best foot forward wherever you go, and it'll help.
And then there is this reality that your best recruiters are your employees. So I mean, there is a lot of truth to that employee referral. So if people are reluctant in contacting the employees in a particular organization, I would really if some organization is following, like we are following the referrals, and we are 50% of our hiring is from employee referrals. So if you have the right skill and you think that you can definitely fit into that position, as I said, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, we have a lot of these social media websites, and it's really easy to find an individual from a particular company or your old contacts maybe. So if you reach out to that particular person, any employee, it might not be from the HR department, but if you reach out to an employee, he would happily refer you, because at the end of the day, if he thinks that you can close the position, he is getting paid. So I mean, why are these freshers or maybe these professionals reluctant in contacting these HR professionals, or maybe the employees of the companies who are advertising this position?
Yes,
I'm
please.
sorry. And that also goes down to the recruiters. If the recruiters are pretty serious about the business that they're in and they really want to go forward with it, they should be hiring people on those particular skills that they have, and not for just contacts and
well, you see, as we were mentioning earlier, so there would be thousands of CVs coming through.
Yes, the CVs, we've talked enough about the CVs, but then if you go down to the interviewing, then if a person comes in and you want someone who has at least patience and can collaborate, like you said, you can write collaborate in your CV, but how do you know that person is collaborative? Why don't you give him a role? Why don't you ask him, like, you be my boss, recruit me, let's see how much patience you've got. I mean, I've been interviewing places, but nobody has ever used these techniques. I mean, these are pretty useful techniques.
Actually,
even in the
I just want to ask a little broader question here, and I'm glad you brought it up. And you've seen it also earlier, Yasir. Now, you've got somebody young who's just doing a degree, and so there's this aspect. And I find this also a question about internships in general. Like, when you do go for an internship, you find on occasion some people are there to drink tea. Some people are so overhyped and excited that it also becomes a problem for you because you don't have time to give? I mean, what's your advice there? Now, for example, I find this interesting, like, you know, she's got recommendations of how you should conduct interviews, but whereas maybe it doesn't take into account the time, the preparation, because there's also a cost attached to recruiting, even if it's like an opportunity cost or whatever.
Yes, but if
Yes.
I can add,
Yes.
if you're talking about the time and the resources, that takes into recruiting a person. If a wrong person is recruited, equal amounts and double amounts of money would go into that.
Yes.
So why don't you do that effort while recruiting? Why don't you recruit the correct person and have those tests like the MBTI test, the Big 5 test, and hire the correct person for the correct job instead of just terminating that person later and then going through the entire process again?
Sorry, please.
Yeah, so if I may address. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You see, for me as the director of HR in this company, I've got a goal in my performance evaluation that measures attrition of the organization.
Great.
I need to ensure that the attrition in the organization is at the minimum level. So we usually would get very aggressive targets for that. And if I go out and make these bad hires that you're talking about, the attrition is going to skyrocket. But if we don't lose the person in the first 6 months, they won't perform and we'll have to get rid of them anyways or manage them out.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't want to make those mistakes. And I mean, what confidently I can say in our organization, we try and make the process as transparent as possible. So there are various tiers where you have to get through before you're finally selected, even for an interview. That is one. Secondly, there is a lot of focus on the type of talent that we require and the type of skill set that we require. And where there is a niche for any type of a role, we would make sure that there are certain tests that we make the individuals go through before we shortlist. We probably cannot do it for everyone and on every occasion. That's a challenge that we face, unfortunately. So sort of staying within the limited resources that we have and the limited time that we have, we try and make sure that the decisions that we make are the best ones for the organization.
If I could just ask a question based on Sadia's point. Now, and this is open to all of you, is like, you know, Sadia's quoting models, it's going to personality tests, and I mean, you've also studied HR specifically, and now you're in practice. But I mean, that's a bit of a positivist argument that, you know, there are tools of actually judging human behavior exactly. And, but I mean, in practice, then as you gain in experience within HR, how much do you start leaving out these tools, and then you've got your own sort of even gut feel and whatever? How does that change?
I mean, there are no right answers in life, really. I mean, there's no such machine where you'd like, you know, put in a set of qualities and outcomes, the leading individual.
No, gut feel is absolutely, it's a gift, I think. Jack Welch went to the point of taking General Electric to that point because of his gut feelings.
Well, a lot of people could contest that as well. Jack Welch started off as a shop floor employee. He had to his advantage, like, you know, many years of experience in that organization. So it was not all gut feel, it was experience in that very context. So I mean, that's like, you know, contestable. But coming back to Fasi's question here, really, I think there are less riskier ways of, you know, making sure that the hire that you make is one that won't either run away, or worse still, not make six other people run away around that individual in the team. So you have to preserve both, you know, really. I would totally second you on, you know, the cost of a bad hire is really bad. Everybody pays for it, not just the employer. But again, in limited time with a given set of constraints that we normally work with, and all the intangibles and all the peculiarities of human nature, really, you know, every person is unique. So you cannot really bank on a personality test rating and say, well, okay, so it's going to be a consistent behavior response by X many individuals because of their common, it's like horoscope signs. I mean, not every Capricorn is, you know, all the same. So, yeah. So I think
everybody does not even know what sort of what rating to give to a particular question. I mean, understanding those is also pretty important.
You know, it's really how well you can fool the system. I mean, if you ask me, when I see a psychometric test thrown at me, I work it to my advantage, saying, okay, well, this is the job description.
I do this.
They want a leadership person. Let's take A, B, C, and Z, and that might not be me. Really,
you come across very, you know, notoriously intelligent candidates as well, because they are really good in there are free tests available online everywhere. Okay? So what they're going to do is that if they're good in research, they do their research, they they try to
Try to reach
answer
the
things in different ways,
best
and once
possible
they
answers.
they are looking for the best possible
Reverse
answer.
engineer the whole
Yes.
thing, and
Yeah.
you know.
It's really a technical thing when it comes to psychometric testing, that you find there is no right answer to any question in psychometric testing as well. So it really has to do with the guy who is analyzing the test, that what sort of qualities that he is looking into. But again, if you come across the intelligent candidates, they'll
I mean, this is something that would complement your process, for sure. I mean, you
for
can
sure.
certainly leverage on that
Yeah.
if you
Well,
want to.
it will
If
make
you-
recruiters' life easier.
Yeah.
With the grain of
Anyhow,
salt, really. Yeah.
I'm just going to have to come and close the program right now, but I have to say I've really enjoyed the discussion with all of you. I'll probably call this panel exactly as it is next time round to continue with the discussion. Thank you, Yasir, so much for coming on the program.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Sadia.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Sheraz, and thank you, Imran. It's been a pleasure having all of you. And we come to a close to the program, and we've been discussing recruitment and HR. If you're a student or if you're somebody who's working, I think there were nuggets that should be quite useful in a utilitarian sense immediately, and some broader issues that were just good to hash out and discuss. Make sure that you're careful with your resumes. I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. There are ways of doing it. There's ways of actually adapting it, whether it's done for a machine or for a person, and ways of identifying who will be actually looking at it in the first instance. You can also watch the program on world.ptv.com.pk, and you can join us on Facebook, Gateway with Fasi Zaka. See you next week. Hope you have a great week.